That night, I learned something I never wanted to believe: a wedding can be beautiful enough to make you cry, and cruel enough to destroy two families in the same breath. My name is Freda Jackson. I'm 55 years old, and I've raised 3 children on my own strength, my own hands, and a kind of faith you don't talk about, you just live it. I've worked hard. I've made mistakes. I've swallowed pride more times than I can count. But there is one thing I never learned to do. I never learned how to stay quiet when someone tries to break my child. This story is about my oldest son, Toto, though most people called him Tito because it sounded friendlier, lighter, easier. Tito was the kind of man who held doors open without thinking about it, who checked on his younger siblings, even when life was already heavy, who never raised his voice unless something truly mattered. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have the newest car. He didn't come from money. But he had something you cannot buy, and I used to tell him that when he was a boy, character is what you have when no one is clapping. Tito grew into that lesson. When he told me he was getting married, I felt what every mother feels when her child steps into a new life: pride and fear, joy and worry, all tangled together like thread you can't separate. But I was happy. I truly was. Because Tito looked alive. He had that softened gaze that men get when they've found a place to rest their heart. He had that quiet confidence that comes when your life finally makes sense. He laughed more. He even sang around the house sometimes, softly, when he thought no one was listening. And the woman behind that change was Sophia Sterling. Sophia wasn't perfect, no one is. But she was kind. She was warm. She looked at my son like he was enough. Not like a project to fix. Not like a ladder to climb. Not like a name to use. She looked at him like home. And for months I believed we were walking toward a beautiful day. I did not know we were walking toward a storm. The day that should have been pure. The wedding was on a Saturday. The kind of day people call perfect. Without thinking. The sky was clear. The sun was gentle, not harsh. There was a light breeze that made the air feel clean and hopeful, as if the world itself had decided to behave for once. The ceremony was at St. Augustine's Parish, a church that always smelled like polished wood and quiet prayers. If you've ever sat in a church before a wedding begins, you know that feeling. Half peace, half anticipation. The soft murmurs, the shuffling feet. The scent of flowers that's so strong it almost makes you dizzy. The church was decorated with white lilies and ivory ribbons. White lights hung from the ceiling like small stars. Guests smiled. Phones were tucked away. People whispered about how beautiful everything looked. But I noticed something else. The Sterling side of the family, they moved like a different species. They were dressed in expensive fabrics that didn't crease. Their jewelry caught the light in a way that made you aware of it. They spoke in that smooth, practiced tone that says, "I belong everywhere I enter." My family wasn't like that. We came in clean, respectful, proud in our own way. We came in with warm hugs. "And how are you, honey?" And, "Look at you." And, "I can't believe he's grown." We came in with realness. Tato stood near the altar in a navy blue suit he loved so much that he'd sent me a picture the moment he tried it on. "Mom," he had said, smiling on the phone, "I look like somebody." I'd laughed and told him, "You always were somebody." Now, in that church, he looked handsome. Nervous but handsome. His hands trembled a little. He kept adjusting his cuffs, clearing his throat, glancing toward the doors like he was trying to calm his heart. I walked up to him before everything started and held his hands. "You okay?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard. "I'm okay. I don't want to mess it up." "You won't," I said. "You could never mess up love." He smiled, and I saw the little boy in him for a moment. The boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. The boy who used to ask if monsters were real, if only he knew what kind of monster we had invited into that room. Then the music changed. The doors opened. And Sophia walked in. She wore a white dress that was simple but elegant, the kind that didn't need extra sparkle to be breathtaking. Her veil fell like soft lace. Her eyes glistened with tears. She looked at Tito, and when their eyes met, the whole church felt warmer. She was radiant, and the man walking her down the aisle, her father, Humphrey Sterling, walked like he owned the floor beneath his shoes. Mr. Sterling was a big man. Not just tall, but broad, heavy in a way that made people step aside without being asked. He wore a dark suit, a gold watch, and a smile that looked practiced. He didn't look at the guests like a father filled with emotion. He looked at the guests like an executive scanning an audience. When he reached the front, he placed Sophia's hand into Tito's hand. I watched my son's face. I saw the respect in his eyes, the gratitude, the desire to do everything right. I watched Mr. Sterling's face, and I saw something colder. Not a father giving away his daughter. A man making a transaction. The priest spoke. The vows came. Sophia and Tito promised each other love, loyalty, partnership. They held each other's hands like they were holding on for life itself. I cried. I couldn't stop myself. Because it was beautiful. And because I sensed, deep down, that beauty like that is rare, and rare things are often targeted. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. People stood, smiles everywhere. Cameras flashed. And I thought, just for a moment, maybe my fears were wrong. Maybe this would be simple. Maybe my son would get the happiness he deserved. We went to the reception afterward at a country club hall that looked like it belonged in a magazine. White tablecloths. Golden candles. A dance floor shining under chandeliers. A stage with a microphone set up in the center like it was waiting for someone to step up and take control. There were more than 200 guests, and the difference between the two families became even more obvious. The Sterling crowd gathered in tight circles, laughing politely, sipping champagne, talking about business deals, golf trips, and people they knew. My side, my people, laughed louder, hugged longer, ate with real appetite, took pictures with messy joy, told childhood stories about Tito that made him blush. And Sophia, she floated between both worlds like a bridge that was cracking quietly under pressure. She loved my son. I knew that. But she also carried the weight of a father like a chain she didn't know how to remove. The calm before the cruelty dinner was served. Steak, potato, salad, soup. Everything expensive and beautifully presented. I sat near the side watching. Not because I didn't want to be part of things, but because I've lived long enough to know sometimes you learn more by watching than by talking. I saw Sophia's mother, Eleanor Sterling, a quiet woman with an elegant look and a sadness she tried to hide. She smiled when people spoke to her, but her eyes didn't sparkle. They looked tired. I noticed that. I stored it in my mind the way mothers store things without realizing it. I watched Mr. Sterling shake hands, slap backs, laugh too loudly, tell stories that placed him at the center of everything. He enjoyed being seen. He enjoyed being listened to. And I saw him glance at my son several times, as if he was measuring him, calculating him, judging him. Tito, oblivious, was simply happy. He danced with Sophia. He hugged his friends. He looked like a man who believed the world was finally kind. And then the music lowered. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin the toasts." My heart tightened, and I didn't even know why yet. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way Mr. Sterling straightened his jacket before he stood up, like a performer who had been waiting all night for his scene. The MC smiled. "We are honored to have the bride's father, Humphrey Sterling, share a few words." Applause erupted from the Sterling side. Mr. Sterling rose, walked to the stage, took the microphone, and smiled like he was about to announce a grand opening. He held up his glass. "Good evening, everyone," he said in a deep voice that carried through the hall like a command. "Thank you for joining us on this special night." More applause. "As a father," he continued, "this is a bittersweet moment. Tonight I give away my daughter, my princess, my pride." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She smiled like a little girl still trying to earn his approval. Mr. Sterling paused. Let the silence build. He was good at that. Then he looked at my son, and his expression shifted just slightly, but enough for me to see. "Sophia has always been very special," he said. "Smart, beautiful, capable. She could have chosen anyone." A few nervous laughs. "Anyone," he repeated, drawing it out. He tapped the microphone lightly, like he was testing the audience. "And yet," he said, "she chose Tito." More laughter, but it didn't sound warm. It sounded entertained. Sterling smiled wider. "Tito," he said, "is a hardworking boy. I can't deny that." He paused again. The room waited. "He comes from a humble family." That word, humble, felt like an insult wearing a polite mask. I felt my jaw tighten. Tito lowered his gaze. I saw his shoulders stiffen. Sophia squeezed his hand under the table, but she didn't stop her father. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Mr. Sterling continued, "But when a woman sets her mind on something, you know how it is. There's no changing it." Lauder rose again. Stronger now. Crueler. And then he raised his glass higher and said, "So tonight, I want to toast my daughter. Her stubbornness, her determination." He leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a secret with the entire room. "And I want to say something I've already said in private. He looked directly at my son. His smile sharpened. That boy is an idiot. For a second the room froze. Then it erupted, laughter loud and rolling like a wave that swallowed dignity. Some people clapped. Actually clapped. Others laughed awkwardly, looking around like they weren't sure if they were allowed to disagree. And my son turned pale. His hands clenched. His eyes glistened with something he fought hard to hide. His jaw tightened as if he was holding his soul in place. I looked at Sophia. Her smile collapsed. She looked horrified. She leaned close to Tato's ear and whispered something, but it was too late. A man doesn't forget humiliation like that. Not on his wedding day. Not in front of 200 people. I looked at Eleanor Sterling. Sophia's mother stared down at her plate as if she could disappear into it. And Mr. Sterling. He stood there smiling, enjoying the attention, enjoying the power, enjoying the way his words had cut my son in public. I felt something inside me break, not in a fragile way, in a dangerous way, because there are two kinds of silence. The silence of patience, and the silence right before a storm. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but I stood anyway. The chatter lowered as people noticed movement. I walked toward the stage. The floor felt too bright, the lights felt too hot. My heartbeat sounded like a drum in my ears. Mr. Sterling saw me approaching. His smile faded. He pulled the microphone closer, as if he could use it as a shield. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, voice tight. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I climbed the steps. I reached out, and I took the microphone from his hand. The room went silent so suddenly you could hear a fork clink against a plate. I stood at the edge of that stage with 200 eyes on me. And I spoke. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Freda Jackson. I'm Tato's mother." My voice trembled at first, but I steadied it. "A few moments ago," I continued, "Mr. Sterling called my son an idiot in front of all of you on his wedding day. No laughter now. Only tension. Only discomfort." I looked at my son. Then I looked at Mr. Sterling. "And I want you all to know something," I said. "My son is not an idiot." I lifted my chin. My son is an honest man, a hardworking man, a man who keeps his word, a man who pays his debts, a man who respects women, a man who loves with his whole heart. Mr. Sterling shifted, his face darkening. I leaned slightly into the microphone. "But you, Mr. Sterling," the air changed. "You don't get to speak about intelligence or dignity." His eyes widened. "Excuse me." I could feel the whole room holding its breath. I reached into my purse. My fingers closed around something that felt heavier than paper. And I said the sentence that would change everything. "Because I know things about you." That's when Mr. Sterling's smile disappeared completely. And that's when I realized, as I stood there with my son's entire future behind me, that there was no turning back. Not anymore. Not after a man publicly tried to break the groom just to prove he could. I looked at the crowd. I looked at my son. And I said, quietly but clearly, "And tonight, you're going to hear the truth." The woman my son fell in love with, after that night at the wedding. The night that would later be dissected, judged, praised, and condemned, I often found myself returning to an earlier time, a quieter time, a time before microphones and humiliation, before truth shattered illusions. Because no story like this begins with an explosion. It begins softly, it begins with love. It was January, cold in a way that made your bones ache if you stayed still too long. I remember the day clearly because it was one of those ordinary afternoons that later become extraordinary in memory. The kettle was whistling. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside fighting the winter air outside. I had just come home from work, my coat still on, when Toato walked into the kitchen with that look on his face. That look mothers recognize instantly. "Hope. Mom," he said, trying to sound casual but failing terribly. "I met someone?" I turned off the stove and looked at him. He was 28 then, grown, independent, serious about his career. He wasn't the type to talk lightly about relationships. "Oh," I said, stirring the coffee slowly. "And what's her name?" "Sophia." He smiled when he said it, like the name itself made him happy. "She's different," he added quickly, as if afraid the moment would slip away if he didn't explain it fast enough. "She's smart. She's studying architecture. She makes me laugh. And she listens, Mom. Like really listens." I studied him the way only a mother can. His shoulders were relaxed. His eyes were brighter. He looked lighter somehow. "And where did you meet her?" I asked. "At a site visit," he said. "Her class was touring a project my firm worked on. We talked after. Then we talked again. And again." "How long has it been?" 3 months. 3 months wasn't long, but it was long enough to know when something mattered. Do you want me to meet her? I asked. He nodded eagerly. Sunday. Dinner, please. I agreed without hesitation. A mother always wants to see what makes her child smile. T first to dine er. Sophia arrived right on time that Sunday evening. She rang the doorbell and stood there holding a small container with both hands, like she was presenting a gift carefully. Mrs. Jackson, she said, smiling warmly. Thank you for having me. I made chicken and rice. It's my specialty. I noticed her eyes immediately. They were kind but cautious, like someone used to measuring her words. She was beautiful, yes, but not in a loud way. Long dark hair pulled back simply. No excessive makeup, no arrogance, just presence. Come in, I said, hugging her lightly. You're welcome here. Toto hovered nearby like a nervous teenager, watching every move, ready to jump in if things went wrong. Dinner was comfortable. Surprisingly so. Sophia helped set the table without being asked. She laughed at Toto's childhood stories. She spoke about her studies with genuine passion, about sustainable housing, about building affordable homes, about designing spaces where families could actually live, not just impress. I liked her. I really did. But then the conversation turned. So, I asked gently, pouring water into her glass, what do your parents do? The shift was subtle, but I felt it. Sophia's smile faltered, not completely but enough. My dad, she said slowly, moving the food around her plate, owns a construction company. Sterling and Associates. A Sterling. The name landed heavier than it should have. Oh, I said carefully. That must be demanding. She nodded. He's very demanding. About everything. And your mother? I asked. My mom doesn't work. She never has. She manages the house. She's very quiet. Toto reached for Sophia's hand instinctively. And what does your father think of Toto? I asked, watching her closely. Sophia looked down. I haven't told him yet. Toto blinked. Sophia, what? She sighed. It's not that simple. My dad believes men have to prove their worth. He doesn't trust anyone who doesn't come from money. I felt something tighten in my chest. Toto comes from an honest family, I said firmly. Hardworking, with values. Sophia looked up at me with eyes that suddenly filled with tears. I know, she whispered. That's why I love him. That moment told me everything I needed to know about her. She wasn't shallow. She wasn't calculating. She was afraid. Reda flages cum kuigawai. Over the next few months, Sophia became a regular presence in our lives. She and Toto were inseparable in that calm, healthy way that doesn't feel desperate. They cooked together, studied together, planned quietly. Toto was happier than I'd ever seen him. But there was always that shadow, that father. One evening, Toto came home unusually quiet. He dropped his keys on the counter and sat down heavily. Mom, he said, rubbing his face. I met her parents. My stomach sank and, I asked. He hesitated. Her mom is sweet. Quiet. But her dad, he trailed off. What about him? I pressed. He asked me about my salary, my savings, whether I own property, how much I earned per month, whether I planned to advance quickly. And what did you say? The truth, he replied. That I earn enough, that I'm saving, that I don't own a house yet. And then, he laughed, Toto said, clenching his fists. He said, I hope you know my daughter is accustomed to a certain standard of living. Anger rose in me, but I swallowed it. And Sophia. She defended me. She told him I was a good man. He just smiled and said, we'll see. I didn't sleep that night. Because men who say we'll see rarely mean well. Tishi Pierposa. Despite everything, love moved forward. In April, Toto proposed. He did it quietly, no grand gestures, no public performance. Just honesty, just heart. Sophia said yes. When he called me, his voice trembled with joy. Mom, he said. She said yes. I congratulated him. I truly did. But when I hung up, I sat alone in my bedroom and stared out the window. Something inside me whispered, this man will not let this go. Sapichaya comes to Memi 2 weeks later. Sophia came to see me alone. She looked like she hadn't slept. Mrs. Jackson? She said, tears spilling before she could stop them. My dad doesn't want me to marry Toto. I made her chamomile tea. I sat her down. What did he say? He said Toto has no future, that he's mediocre, that I'll regret marrying him. I took her hands. And what do you think? She hesitated. I love Toto. But my dad, he's stubborn. And my mom always follows his lead. I'm afraid they won't support me. I leaned closer. Sophia, I said quietly, true love doesn't surrender to fear. If you love my son, fight for him. She nodded slowly. I will. she said. "I promise." Ooh, and she did. She confronted her father. She stood her ground. Humphrey Sterling had no choice but to accept the engagement. But men like him don't accept defeat. They wait. Tichi Parisi Office Munawai. When wedding planning began, Mr. Sterling took control. "The wedding will be at the country club," he said. "I'll pay for everything, but it will be done my way." Watodu was uncomfortable. "Mum," he told me, "I don't like this. I want to contribute. I don't want to owe him." "Sometimes," I said carefully, "compromise is part of marriage, but never at the cost of dignity." He nodded, but I could see the tension growing, and that's when something happened that confirmed my fears. One afternoon, while having coffee downtown, I saw him. Humphrey Sterling. He wasn't alone. He was with another woman younger, and 2 small children. The woman kissed him on the mouth. The children called him Dad. My hands went cold. I paid my bill, walked to my car, and sat there shaking. I knew in that moment that my son was walking into a family built on lies, and I knew something else. I would not let that happen quietly. And for 3 nights I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that scene again. And then I thought of Eleanor Sterling, the quiet wife, the sad eyes. I needed proof, so I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator, and that decision would change everything. A father who judges by wealth. If there is one thing I have learned in my life, it is this: people rarely show you who they truly are in loud moments. They reveal themselves quietly, in questions they shouldn't ask, in silences that feel heavy, in the way they look at you when they think you are beneath them. Humphrey Sterling revealed himself long before the wedding microphone ever touched his hand. First after the cafe incident, after I saw Humphrey Sterling with another woman and 2 small children, my instincts were already screaming. But before that discovery, before proof and investigations, there had been something else. A slow, uncomfortable realization. It came through my son. Toto began coming home quieter, not unhappy, not distant, just weighed down. One evening he sat at my kitchen table, staring at his phone without really looking at it. His coffee grew cold in front of him. "Mom," he said eventually, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, sitting across from him. "Do you think a man's worth is measured by what he earns?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I studied him. "Why would you ask that?" He exhaled slowly. "Because sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I work, it's still not enough for some people." I didn't need him to say the name. I already knew. "Todo," I said gently. "Money measures income, not character. Anyone who confuses the two is already poor in ways they don't understand." He nodded, but the doubt didn't leave his eyes. That night, I lay awake thinking about Humphrey Sterling. Not about what he had done, but about how he thought. The next major turning point came when Humphrey Sterling invited Toto to dinner alone. Not with Sophia, just him. "Mom," Toto told me beforehand, "he says he wants to get to know me better." My stomach tightened. "Be polite," I said. "Be honest. And remember who you are." He nodded. When he returned that night, I knew immediately that something had gone wrong. He didn't take off his jacket. He didn't sit down right away. He stood by the door like someone unsure whether they were welcome even in their own home. "How did it go?" I asked softly. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "It felt like a job interview," he said. He told me everything. How Humphrey Sterling asked where he went to school, how much he earned, how fast he expected to move up, whether he planned to start his own company, whether he owned property, whether he had ambition. And then, Toto said, his voice tightening, leaned back in his chair and said, "Son, love is nice, but it doesn't pay the bills." I clenched my jaw. "What did you say?" I said I believed marriage was about partnership, about building together. And he smiled. Toto replied bitterly and said, "We'll see if you're enough." Enough. That word followed my son home like a bruise. A man amobo ho nended tio dummy mighty. Men like Humphrey Sterling don't just want success. They want superiority. They don't just want money. They want power over people, especially people they believe should feel grateful. I saw it in the way he spoke about Toto. Not openly cruel, just dismissive, as if my son were a temporary inconvenience his daughter would eventually outgrow. Sophia, bless her heart, tried to shield Toto from it. She argued with her father. She defended her choice. She insisted on her love. But she was still his daughter, And daughters raised by men like that often carry a lifetime of emotional debt they never agreed to. Theos of appearances. When I was finally invited to the Sterling home for a family dinner, I understood even more. Their house was enormous, marble floors, high ceilings, furniture chosen for display, not comfort. Everything looked expensive. But nothing felt warm. Eleanor Sterling greeted me politely, with a tight smile and tired eyes. She looked like a woman who had learned how to survive quietly. Sophia hugged me immediately, as if relieved to see something familiar. And then Humphrey Sterling entered the room. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome." His grip was firm, but cold. We sat down to dinner. He talked about business nonstop. Projects, contracts, connections, numbers. He barely asked about my family. When he did, it felt performative. "And you raised 3 children on your own?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That must have been challenging." "It was," I replied calmly, "but it was honest work." He smiled thinly. "Yes," he said. Honesty is important. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Tichi momenti shirosity toward the end of the evening. Humphrey Sterling asked Toto to join him in his study. Just the 2 of them. I didn't like it. I liked it even less when Toto returned. His face was pale. "What did he say?" I asked when we were finally alone. Toto swallowed hard. He said he's paying for the wedding. "And that means certain expectations?" "Expectations," I repeated. "He said Sophia is used to a certain lifestyle, and if I can't provide it he will. That I should be grateful." "Grateful? For what?" I asked sharply. "For marrying his daughter." That was the moment something inside me hardened. Because no man gets to buy control over another man's dignity. Not ever. Teach UNSTLNG PTR, and after that dinner, things changed. Humphrey Sterling began inserting himself into every decision. The venue, the guest list, the seating arrangements. He rejected people he considered unimportant. Sophia cried more. Toto grew quieter, and Eleanor Sterling said nothing. Not once. I watched it all. I observed the pattern. Humphrey Sterling didn't just want to host a wedding. He wanted to stage dominance. He wanted to remind everyone, especially my son, who held the power. Buhy to LDNIJ monarchamar. Some people might ask, why didn't you speak up sooner? Because timing matters. Truth delivered too early can be dismissed as jealousy. Truth delivered without proof can be destroyed. I needed certainty. And then I saw him at that cafe, and everything shifted from suspicion to obligation. Tie silly and on. That night, after the dinner at the Sterling house, I sat alone in my bedroom. I replayed every interaction, every comment, every look, every subtle insult, and I asked myself one question: what kind of man humiliates another man to feel important? The answer scared me, because men like that don't stop. They escalate, and I knew with absolute clarity that if nothing changed, my son would one day stand in a room full of people and be humiliated again, publicly, deliberately. And this time, I would be ready. Amoadata IDDN. At that moment, I still didn't know that Humphrey Sterling was hiding a second family, that his wealth was built on theft, that his company was collapsing, that his arrogance was fueled by desperation. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was this: a man who judges worth by wealth is terrified of being exposed. And exposure was coming. The secret I was never meant to see. Some moments don't arrive with drama. They don't announce themselves. They don't warn you. They slip into your life quietly, and by the time you realize what you've seen, you can never unsee it. That moment came for me on an ordinary afternoon, in a place I had visited hundreds of times before. Anno Ardinariy, it was a weekday, sometime after lunch. The kind of afternoon where time feels suspended between responsibility and rest. I had finished running errands downtown. My feet ached, my head was full, and I decided to stop for coffee before heading home. Nothing special, nothing symbolic. Just coffee. The cafe sat near the main square, glass windows, small tables, soft music playing in the background. People typed on laptops, couples whispered over shared desserts. Waiters moved back and forth carrying cups and plates. I ordered an Americano and chose a table near the window. That's when I saw him. Th5 Tiro. While Humphrey Sterling walked in without looking around. He didn't need to. Men like him expect the world to make space. He wasn't alone. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. A woman walked beside him, young, maybe early 30s. Her hand rested comfortably on his arm, not politely, not formally, familiar. Behind them were 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were laughing, tugging at his jacket, calling out excitedly, "Dad!" The word landed in my chest like a blow. I froze. My coffee arrived untouched. Humphrey Sterling smiled at the woman, softly, naturally, in a way I had never seen him smile before. He bent down, spoke to the children, brushed the girl's hair back from her face. The woman leaned in and kissed him, on the mouth, not quickly, not secretly, openly, affectionately. I felt the blood drain from my face. The word sefkes, I remember gripping the edge of the table because my hands started shaking. My first instinct was denial. You must be mistaken. Maybe it's a brother. Maybe it's a relative. But the children called him Dad again. The boy climbed into his lap. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck. This was no misunderstanding. This was a life. A second life. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid someone would hear it. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. All I could think was my son is marrying into this. The woman spoke animatedly, laughing, touching his arm as she talked. She looked relaxed, happy. Not like someone hiding, not like someone afraid. She looked like a woman who believed she was loved. The children looked clean, well-dressed, comfortable. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a long-term deception. I glanced at my watch. Mid-afternoon, middle of the week. While Eleanor Sterling, the quiet wife, probably believed her husband was at work, I thought of Sophia. Her tears, her longing for her father's approval, her belief that she had to earn love. And suddenly, everything made sense. I paid my bill without tasting my coffee. I walked out of the cafe on unsteady legs. I sat in my car with the engine off, staring straight ahead. For several minutes, I did nothing. Then the truth settled in fully. Humphrey Sterling wasn't just arrogant. He was living a lie. And if he could deceive his wife, his daughter, his company, and his community, what chance did my son have? For 3 nights after that, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same scene: Humphrey Sterling laughing with those children, the woman kissing him, the ease with which he moved between lives. And then I thought of Eleanor Sterling, her sad smile, her silence, her constant agreement. I understood her now, not weakness, survival. And Sophia had no idea. That knowledge burned inside me. I asked myself the same question over and over. What do I do now? If I stayed silent, my son would marry into a family built on deception. If I spoke without proof, I would be dismissed as jealous, dramatic, interfering. And worse, Sophia would be destroyed without understanding why. I didn't want revenge, I wanted protection, and protection requires truth. But truth requires evidence. On the 4th night, around 2 a.m, I sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing, and I made a decision I never thought I would make. I would investigate him. Quietly, carefully, legally. Not to humiliate him, not to punish him, but to know exactly what kind of world my son was about to step into. A friend of mine, whose husband had cheated years earlier, gave me a name. Roy Mendez, she said. Private investigator. Discreet. Expensive, but worth it. I hesitated. I wasn't wealthy. $5,000 a week felt like a mountain. But then I pictured my son's face at that wedding. Roy's office was in an old building above a dry cleaner, 2nd floor, narrow stairs. Smell of detergent and old coffee. The door was plain, no sign. Inside, the office was small. Filing cabinets, an old desk, a computer that looked older than both of us. Roy Mendez was thin, quiet, professional. Have a seat, he said. How can I help you? I took a deep breath, and I told him everything. About my son, the wedding, the cafe, the second family. I showed him a photo of Humphrey Sterling from a company website. Roy studied it carefully. Do you know where you saw him? He asked. Yes, I said. Southern Star Cafe, near the square. Friday, around 4. He nodded. I'll need a week, he said. I'll follow him. If there's another family, I'll find it. And if there's more, and there usually is, I'll find that too. How much? I asked. $5,000 for the week, plus expenses. I paid him, without hesitation, because peace of mind is priceless. That week was torture. Toto talked excitedly about wedding details. Sophia sent photos of flowers, white roses. Everything looked so innocent, and I smiled. I nodded, I listened. While inside, I carried a growing dread. What if I was wrong? What if this destroyed everything? But every instinct I had told me otherwise. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Mrs. Jackson, Roy said. I need you to come in. My heart dropped. Is it bad? I asked. Yes, he replied calmly. It's worse than you think. Roy turned his computer screen toward me. Photos appeared. Humphrey Sterling entering an apartment building, leaving with the same woman, walking hand in hand with the children, taking them to school. kissing the woman in a parking lot. This woman's name is Veronica Campos, Roy said. She's 32. An accountant. My stomach twisted. She works at Sterling & Associates, he continued. And the children? His, Roy said. A 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. I covered my mouth. How long? I whispered. At least 7 years, Roy replied. 7 years. Sophia's entire adult life. Anton more. Roy opened another folder. This is where it gets serious, he said. Bank statements, transfers, credit card records. He's been diverting company funds, Roy explained. Paying rent, tuition, expenses all through the business and the company, I asked. Roy sighed. It's in trouble. Deep trouble. Lawsuits. Unfinished projects. Massive debt. He owes over $12 million, Roy said. I felt dizzy. And the authorities? I asked. There are investigations underway, Roy replied. It's only a matter of time. Tht adg. I left Roy's office carrying copies of everything. Photos, documents, proof. The sun was setting when I stepped outside. The city moved on like nothing had changed. But my world had. I had just uncovered the truth about a man who believed himself untouchable. And I knew, with terrifying clarity, that my son was standing dangerously close to the fallout. Promise I made me wasi left that night. I placed the folder at the bottom of my closet, under old blankets, out of sight, but never out of mind. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, and whispered to myself, I will not act out of anger. I will not destroy for revenge. But if he humiliates my son again, I will tell the truth, and the truth would destroy him. The investigation, once you know the truth exists, you can't unknow it. You can try to ignore it. You can pretend it doesn't concern you. You can convince yourself it's not your place. But the truth has weight. And once it's in your hands, it presses down on you until you decide what kind of person you are going to be. THFLDRATTAT Buckham OFMYCLE. After I left Roy's office that evening, I didn't go straight home. I drove aimlessly through the city. The sun was setting behind the buildings, turning the sky orange and pink, but I didn't see any of it. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. In the passenger seat was a plain brown folder. Inside it was a man's entire double life photos. Bank statements, transfer records, addresses, dates, every line neatly documented. I parked near a quiet street and just sat there. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't intuition. This was evidence. And evidence changes everything. When I finally got home, it was dark. I locked the door behind me, took off my shoes, and stood in the hallway for a long time without moving. Then I went to my bedroom, opened the closet, lifted an old stack of blankets, and placed the folder at the very bottom. As if hiding it would make it lighter. It didn't. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, images flashed behind my eyelids. Humphrey Sterling laughing with those children. Veronica leaning into him like she trusted him completely. Sophia sitting at my kitchen table, crying, saying she just wanted her father to be proud of her. I turned over in bed again and again. I wasn't angry yet. Anger comes later. What I felt first was grief. Grief for my son who was about to step into a family poisoned by deception. Grief for Sophia, who loved a father she didn't truly know. Grief for Eleanor Sterling, who had spent decades married to a man who treated truth like an inconvenience. And grief for myself, because I knew my life had just become more complicated. By morning, one question kept repeating in my mind. What am I supposed to do with this? If I told Toto immediately, he might cancel the wedding. If I didn't tell him, I would be complicit in a lie. If I told Sophia, I would shatter her world before she even stepped into marriage. There was no clean choice. There was no option without pain. And that's when I understood something important. When the truth is ugly, someone always gets hurt. The only question is who and when. The following days were almost unbearable. Toto was glowing. He talked about table settings, music choices, seating arrangements. He showed me photos of suits, ties, shoes. Sophia sent messages about flowers and decorations, white roses, ivory linens, soft lighting. Everything looked pure. Everything felt false. I smiled. I nodded. I congratulated. And every time, it felt like swallowing glass. I'd look at my son laughing and think if he knew what I know, would he still smile like this? HYDIDNTSPAKE. People often think silence is weakness. It isn't. Sometimes silence is strategy. I didn't speak because I needed clarity, not emotional clarity but moral clarity. I needed to know, was this something that could be resolved privately? Was this something that would explode on its own? Was this something I could warn my son about without destroying his faith in love? And more than anything, I needed to understand Humphrey Sterling better, because men who live double lives are rarely careless. They are calculated. Th's code and be need eat Roy. 3 days later, Roy called me. There's more, he said. My heart sank. Can you come in? He asked. I went. This time, his office felt colder. Roy placed another folder on the desk, thicker than the first. I dug deeper into Sterling and Associates, he said, and what I found explains everything. He slid documents toward me. Financial statements, loan agreements, legal notices. The company is drowning, Roy said. Unpaid suppliers, lawsuits, labor disputes, incomplete projects. My stomach twisted. He owes money everywhere, Roy continued. Banks, contractors, the government. How much, I asked. Roughly 12 million, he replied. I stared at the papers. That's impossible, I whispered. He lives like he's untouchable. That's exactly why, Roy said calmly. Men like him spend louder when they're afraid. T-Rael so you are CEO of HSRO Gansi. Roy leaned back in his chair. Here's the important part, he said. Humphrey Sterling isn't confident. He's desperate. He explained that Sterling and Associates had taken government funds for housing projects that were never completed. That money had vanished into personal accounts. That employees hadn't been paid in months. And the investigation, I asked. Already underway, Roy replied, quietly. But it's coming. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, everything made sense. The control, the arrogance, the obsession with appearances, the need to dominate my son. Humphrey Sterling wasn't powerful. He was terrified, and terrified men are dangerous. The musty dice to RBM giralizatio. And Roy looked at me carefully. There's something else you should know, he said. What? He's using the wedding, Roy continued, to maintain his image. What do you mean? A public display of success, Roy explained. A wealthy, elegant wedding, important guests, political connections. My breath caught. If the truth comes out before then, Roy added, it undermines everything. And in that moment I understood exactly why Humphrey Sterling had been so eager to control the wedding. It wasn't generosity, it was camouflage. Tien Tarnelwar. I went home shaken. I sat at my kitchen table for hours staring at the wall. On one side of me was my son's happiness. On the other was the truth. I thought about the day Tadu was born. About holding him in my arms, promising to protect him. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made so he could grow into a man with dignity. And I asked myself, if I stay silent now, am I protecting him? Or betraying him? Te tested. That weekend there was a rehearsal dinner at the Sterling house. Tadu asked me to come. Mom, he said, I want you there. It matters to me. I didn't want to go. But I went. The house looked even more impressive at night. Lights illuminating the garden, staff moving silently, everything staged. During dinner, Humphrey Sterling dominated the conversation as usual. He bragged about a new project, talked about expansion, mentioned politicians by first name. I watched him carefully. Every word was a performance. Every smile was rehearsed. Sophia barely spoke. Eleanor Sterling nodded silently, and Tadu sat there respectful, humble, unaware that the man across from him was drowning in lies. Tichi plevart kef amint iorn. After dinner, Humphrey Sterling asked me to join him in his study, alone. I knew what he wanted. I followed him. He closed the door behind us. Mrs. Jackson, he said smoothly, I want to be honest with you. The irony almost made me laugh. Yes, I replied calmly. My daughter is entering a different world now, he said. A world of expectations. I said nothing. And your son, he continued, is a good boy. But goodness isn't always enough. I met his gaze. My son is more than enough, I said. He smiled thinly. Time will tell, he replied. And then he added, quietly, I hope you understand who's really in charge here. That was the moment I knew. This man would humiliate my son again. Publicly. Deliberately. To assert control. Th desisoan. I find all Maddie. That night, back home, I took the folder out of the closet. I spread the documents across my bed. And I made a promise to myself I would not ruin the wedding. I would not act impulsively. But if Humphrey Sterling crossed the line again, if he dared to humiliate my son in public, I would expose everything. Not privately, not quietly, but with the truth he feared most. Buech y malad. Waiting was torture, but waiting was necessary. Because truth is most powerful when lies are loudest. And Humphrey Sterling was getting louder by the day. Some truths don't explode the moment you discover them. They sit quietly, they wait. And while they wait, they change you. Teach d speak for eding. After that dinner at the Sterling house, I stopped sleeping properly. Not because I was afraid of Humphrey Sterling, but because I was afraid of myself. Every morning I woke up with the same thought: today could be the day everything breaks. And every night I went to bed thinking, if I say nothing, am I still a good mother? The truth was no longer just information. It had become a presence in my home. I would be making coffee and suddenly remember a bank statement. I'd be folding laundry and see the face of those hidden children. I'd be brushing my teeth and hear Humphrey Sterling's voice saying, "I hope you understand who's really in charge here." That sentence echoed in my head like a threat. Toado was exhausted. The closer the wedding came, the more pressure he carried. He was working long hours trying to finish a project on time so he could take a few days off. At night, he reviewed guest lists, seating charts, last-minute arrangements. But even tired, he was happy. That was the hardest part. He wasn't blind, he wasn't foolish. He was in love, and love makes you generous with trust, sometimes too generous. One evening, he came over with Sophia to finalize some details. They sat at my kitchen table like they always had, holding hands, leaning toward each other unconsciously. Sophia looked pale. "You okay?" I asked her gently. She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. "My dad has been intense," she admitted. Toado squeezed her hand. "He just wants everything to be perfect," he said. I bit my tongue. Because I knew the truth. Humphrey Sterling didn't want perfection. He wanted control. So phis kafasime after Toado went to take a call. Sophia stayed behind with me in the kitchen. She lowered her voice. "Mrs. Jackson, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. She hesitated. "Do you ever feel like my dadla doesn't really see Toto?" I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" She stared at her hands. "He talks about him like he's temporary, like a phase I'll outgrow." My chest tightened. "And how does that make you feel?" I asked. She swallowed. "Like I have to keep proving my choice, like I have to defend the man I love all the time." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for loving my son," I said firmly. She smiled sadly. "I know, I just wish my dad knew that money isn't everything." I almost told her then, but I didn't. Because the truth once spoken can never be taken back. THEVB lemon that night, I opened the folder again. I didn't read everything. I didn't need to. I already knew enough. What I was really doing was checking my resolve. Am I really prepared to do this? Because exposing the truth wouldn't just hurt Humphrey Sterling. It would hurt Sophia. It would hurt Eleanor. It would hurt my son. And it would hurt me. But then I thought about something Roy had said. Men like him don't stop on their own. They only stop when the mask is ripped off. And I knew. If I stayed silent forever, Humphrey Sterling would eventually destroy something else. Someone else. Kello from ROI 2 days later, Roy called again. "Just a heads up," he said. "Things are moving." "What kind of things?" I asked. "The investigation," he replied. "They're closing in. But it's real." My heart skipped. "How soon? Months, maybe weeks," he said. "Hard to say." I looked out the window. "And the wedding?" I asked. Roy paused. "If I were him," he said carefully, "I'd want it to happen before everything collapses." After the call ended, I sat in silence. Everything was aligning, too perfectly. THEENVOPS that night, I did something I hadn't planned. I printed everything, photos, documents, bank transfers, company records. I organized them neatly, and then I prepared 3 envelopes. One for Toto, one for Sophia, one for Eleanor Sterling. I wrote their names on each envelope in steady handwriting. I didn't know if I would ever give them out, but having them ready felt like armor. Lasti Marmingate the day before the wedding, Toto came by alone. He looked nervous. "Mom," he said, sitting down heavily. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied. "Do you think I'm enough?" he asked quietly. My heart broke. "No, for what?" "For Sophia?" he said. "For her world." I stood up and knelt in front of him. "Look at me," I said. He did. "You are more than enough," I told him. "Not because of what you earn, not because of what you own, but because of who you are." He smiled weakly. "Her dad doesn't think so." I took a deep breath. "Her dad's opinion is not a measure of your worth," I said. Toadu nodded, but doubt lingered in his eyes. When he left, I knew something terrible. Humphrey Sterling had already done damage. And he wasn't done yet. Before I barely slept. I sat at the kitchen table, the 3 envelopes laid out in front of me. I asked myself every version of the same question: what if I'm wrong? What if this destroys my relationship with my son? What if I lose everything? And then another thought came. What if I do nothing and regret it forever? By dawn, my decision was clear. I would go to the wedding. I would say nothing. Unless Humphrey Sterling humiliated my son again. If he crossed that line, I would not protect his lies anymore. The day arrived quietly, too quietly. The sky was clear. The air was warm. The city went about its business as if nothing monumental was about to happen. I dressed slowly. Simple dress. Minimal jewelry. I didn't want to look powerful. I wanted to look like a mother. Before leaving, I opened my purse and checked the envelopes. They were there. Heavy final. ATTHURSH. The ceremony was beautiful white flowers. Soft music. Gentle light streaming through stained glass. Toto stood at the altar, nervous and proud. When Sophia walked in, he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. And for a moment, I wished desperately that love would be enough, that truth wouldn't be necessary, that everything could stay intact. But when Humphrey Sterling walked Sophia down the aisle, his posture proud, his smile confident, I saw it again. The arrogance, the performance, the man who believed he owned everything in the room, including my son. The ceremony ended. Applause filled the church. Guests congratulated the couple, laughter echoed. But inside me something was coiled tight, waiting. Because I knew what was coming next. The reception. The microphone. The man who loved to hear himself speak.